looks like things broke. Just bear with me 1 second, and I'm going to try to get everything back online. Need a new computer. Okay, so let's see. Bring my face back. Bear with me here. Just bring this here. Okay, so just bear with me. Let me just get everything back up and running. So it looks like my computer, it did this before when I was testing it. This computer just reboots apparently when I push it too hard. So I got to bring my, let me go back here. So I got to bring my VM back online, and then I will get my tmux back. And anyway, I'll continue talking about the, here, hold on 1 second. Whoops. Okay, there we go. So I'll continue talking about the Beam VM, which is interesting. So basically, what happens is the Beam VM allows the continuing processes to run, even if something were to go wrong with one of them. And so the reason, to answer the question from chat, that we shell out is because we don't shell out is because if you do anything like that, like you shell out or you call a native library or you were to do anything that could break the contract that Beam is running the code, then you kind of introduce all kinds of potential problems. Like you suddenly make it possible to crash, or you suddenly make it possible for the Beam VM to get hung. Say, for example, you were to shell out, say you were, for example, to shell out, and then the process that you shelled out to were to get pegged. Then what that would do is that the whole server may get pegged because it's going to be waiting for that process to make progress. So, okay, so let me get my tmux session here. Here local, go to my Reticulum server. Let's see if this blows up again. Hopefully not. So let's see. Okay, and so if anyone has any other questions, you can go ahead and if anyone has any questions, you can post it in the chat while I get this up and running. Okay. Okay. So now I will go back to my Firefox. Okay. All right. This seems to be something back in order. Good times. All right. Like doing it. Okay. So that's running. And then I will start Reticulum again. Oops, I did that. Okay. And so that's that. And then I'll go get my code up here. Oops. Okay. Okay. Ooh. It's funny, like you set up a stream, you get it all set up, you spend like 20 minutes setting it up, and the computer just decides to shut off. Good times. Okay, so this is why I needed to bring my dog. If I had my dog, I could have just put him up on camera for 5 minutes here while I did this, but sadly he was a bit busy at the moment being a dog. Okay. I actually, I have not cut my hair, but my wife has cut my hair, and yes, she did an amazing job, and we think she may pivot her career from being a surgeon to being somebody that cuts hair because her dexterity with the scissors, I think, came through in her hair cutting skill, which was very impressive. This is the first time she actually ever had done it, and she knew that I was going to be going on camera, so I think the pressure was quite high. Okay. So I hope everybody can see everything because I just kind of got this back up and running very quickly. So let me get back to where I was. So the thing we were going to try to trace through, we saw the files get landed, and so now the thing we're going to figure out is, okay, I'm going to reproduce the bug. Okay, so now the trick with this bug is that it ends up being a problem when there's more than one person in the room, and these kinds of problems are particularly challenging because it's really hard to understand the interaction and simulate the interaction. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this same room again. Actually, I'm going to do it in a private tab. So basically, my two clients going here. First guy, and this is up. So they're effectively the person that uploaded it, but nobody actually owns it yet. Talk about let me just give myself a fake name here. Okay, and no microphone, and now I come on in. And so you can see I've got my other person here, and let me just mute myself. And then there's my little guy in the corner there. So we've got two clients connected. They're both looking at this object. Okay, so now here's the key thing. So if I go in, and there's a table in our database called own files. And so own files is our record of who owns the file. And if there's a record in here, it means that somebody at some point became what we call the owner of the file. Now, what happens to private tabs? Not following that question. I have to repeat that one. But if you're in a private tab, you're basically in a separate session. So that means that there's really no connection between the two clients. And so when a file becomes owned, that's what actually makes it stay on disk. And so you become the owner of the object, and then your account becomes associated with it. And so I think there's actually some stuff in here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete it. Don't try this at home. I'm going to just delete the files. Oops. You should never ever do delete from. It's a bad idea. Okay, so now you can see there's nothing in here. So let's just go through the simple case first. So the simple case is I come in here and I uploaded this. So it's an unowned uploaded file, and now I pin it. So now if you remember, that adds an entry to the room objects table, which just records the structure of the object, where it is, and its URL. But it doesn't, that's just a database record that, that basically notes the URL. But the question is, in this case, this is actually a file we uploaded. So that URL points to a file in Reticulum that's been uploaded. And so we need to make sure that in addition to keeping record of that, we need to make sure that the file doesn't go away and becomes owned. Because when you pin something, the whole point is that you're pinning it and you want it to stick around even after you leave the room, and even after everyone leaves the room, and even after a month goes by, that should still be there. And so the trick is that when we pin the object, if it's an uploaded file, not only do we write it to the room objects table, but we also write a record and move the file into being owned. And so when you become the owner of a file, you effectively not just write a record to this table, but you also end up storing it. It ends up getting moved immediately to a new directory. And so the new directory now, if you may recall from earlier, is in the same storage folder, but now there's an owned folder. And so if you look at my file ID, let me make, or sorry, oh, I can't see that. Okay, so so if you look at, so this is the new record in the own files table. I didn't cut my, see if I can actually fix that. Just give me 1 second. Doing it live. Okay, that'll probably help with not having things cut off anymore. Excellent. So you can see now the own file becomes a record in the database because we ended up pinning it. And then in addition to that, the storage will now move that file to the own file folder. And the point of moving it is that it now will no longer be seen by that vacuum routine. The vacuum routine that we saw before sweeps through just the expiring folder. So anything that's out of that folder is safe from being sucked up in the vacuum. And so if you look, you can see that this ID here is B6. Let me make this bigger again. It's B6, E6, and you can see now in the bottom there that we have a B6 folder. Sorry, I'm just getting this font bigger for everyone. Okay, cool. So you can see now that it's in there's a B6 folder, and then in there's an E6 folder, and so this file is now moved into the owned files folder, meaning it will no longer get deleted, and it's effectively on my computer forever unless I go ahead and unpin it. So you can see me just do that, right? So, okay, so again, I pin this file, becomes owned, and it now will stay on my disk forever. Now, what happens when I unpin the file? So if you remember, when we unpinned it before, it deleted the record from the room objects table. So if you look here, I'll select from the room objects, order by inserted at desk limit 1, and this is the most recently pinned object, and you can see it has this BUSIN ID, we'll call it BUSIN, and if I go ahead and I unpin it, you can see now it's not that one anymore, it gets deleted. But again, that's just a record of the URL. So what happens to the own file? Aha. So you might think that we actually delete the own file. But what we do instead is, because we don't want to actually move the file on the disk, we end up setting the there's a flag. So now this state flag basically indicates the own file is inactive. Because what we did was we don't want to go ahead and move that file out. I think that's part of the reason. I'm trying to remember the entire reason, but ultimately we end up not wanting. That's what it is. We don't want to end up like oscillating the file in the file system. So the first time you pin it, it's a one-time operation. It's a one-time file system operation. We move it into the own files folder. But if people are like pinning and unpinning this thing, we really don't want to be moving the file around all the time. So let's see. Somebody asked, could it be a race condition? You move the files, delete them, and delete them. Right. So there's a there is a lock on the vacuum which will prevent any more than one server doing it. I'm not sure where the other race condition might be. Maybe if you could elaborate. Oh, sorry, never mind. I see that you saw that. Okay. So basically, now that the file is flagged as inactive, there's actually two vacuum processes that run. There's one that will go through all the inactive owned files and move them into the expiring folder. And then the second thing, obviously, will then remove them if they're over the 72 hours. So again, we move them to being owned, which we call promotion, with a single file system operation when the first person who created them or pins it. And then from there, the file actually can oscillate between being owned and unknown, or through this second order flag. So now if I go ahead and pin it again, you can see that now it's active again. So that then kind of makes it permanent. So now, after staring at this bug for a while, what I kind of figured was that what must be going on is that this file is expiring again, namely that it's being exposed to the vacuumer, because the symptom is that it's pinned for a while, people see it, and then a week later they come back and it's gone. So that's almost certainly the vacuumer coming along and getting rid of it. So I stood here and just kind of pinned and unpinned. Maybe we had some kind of race condition in the UI that if you did this a bunch, it would end up in the wrong state. But no, in fact, that's not really possible, because the WebSocket ultimately is serializing those events. So the real root cause is that if you are in another session, and this is where I is that you can actually cause this to get into the wrong state. So, and this is a tricky bug. It's an obvious mistake in retrospect, but to actually get to the point where I understood it was tricky. So, okay, so now I have this other person, and you can see they this person needs to be signed in. So let me see here. Let me just sign in really quick. So this is going to be a different account, by the way. It's not going to be the same account. So let's see. So just going through really fast here. So to sign in, I actually have to grab the authentication URL from my log, because I don't send emails when I'm developing, and so it just ends up basically if you got an email. And so now I should have been signed in. Let's see what happens. Did that work? Okay. So, yes. So when I'm, let's see if I signed in. Yes, I did. Okay, great. So I'm signed in, but I'm not the same person. And now I guess my personal room can't pin still, so I need to actually enable pinning for everybody. So let's do that. And now if I go back, you can see I have the unpin and pin action. Okay, here's the bug. So if I go in, and you can see the state is still active on the owned file. If I am not the person that pinned it, if I unpin it, the server just ignores what I did, because the way we wrote the code was, if you are trying to depromote a file, basically, if you unpin something, you're effectively also trying to depromote it. The server is not going to mess around with the ownership. That's kind of the policy. We're like, you don't own a file, so you shouldn't have the right to actually flip the state to be inactive. And you can see, in fact, it's still active, right? But since I have pinning permission, I was actually able to unpin the file. So the file is actually unpinned because pinning permission is a separate thing. So you can see if I go back to my original window here, and just to make it a little bit bigger. So I was in my, this is the unprivileged user who unpinned it, but yet the file is still considered active because the owner was the one who pinned it originally. And so now if I go, I'm trying to remember now. Maybe this is not right. Oh yeah, and so now this is the edge case. Sorry, it took me a second to remember. So now as the non-owner, let's say oh man, I can't remember now. Let me see if I wrote it down. I should have remembered this beforehand. Okay, so now user B pins the object. Let's see. Yes, I remember now. Okay, I had it somewhat backwards. Okay, so now let me reset. So now I'm the person that uploaded the file. So then I pinned it, and then it's active, right? And now if I go back to my reproductions, and this is really hard to do on camera, by the way, so I'm struggling a little bit. So if I unpin it, oh, okay, it's actually quite simpler than I thought. So now, if I'm the other user, right, now the original owner unpinned it, so it's inactive again. If I'm the other person and I go ahead, I actually have the right to pin it because I have the permission, but I don't have the right anymore to become the owner because it already became the owner because the person originally pinning it is the owner, right? So that's the sequence of events. So user A has to upload a file and pin it, and they become the owner, right? And then they have to unpin it, right? And so now it's inactive and not pinned. And then another person has to come along and pin it, who has the rights to pin it. But the error in our logic is that once an object becomes owned, it can't be reassigned. It's still only owned by the original person because that's just part of the rules. We don't want to reassign ownership because ultimately ownership is about who owns the content. And that content, once it's owned by somebody, we consider it to be their responsibility to manage it. Say, for example, they had to pay for storage or wanted to come back and remove it. We don't want to mess around and change the ownership out from under them. But the pinning permission is still there for the second person. And so if they go ahead and pin it, there's a catch-22. Basically, they have the right to pin it, but they don't have the right to become the owner. And so the result is that in our database, our uploaded file remains inactive because we are not the owner. And our code basically says, oh, sorry, I changed my thing. So now that I've been on the second person, I went ahead and I pinned the file that I don't own, but I can pin it because I have the permission to pin it. Now the database still reflects that it's inactive because I'm not the owner, and I tried to make myself the owner, but I was denied because it already is owned by somebody else. And so now we're in the busted state. We have an object, it's pinned, everyone expects it to stick around, but ultimately because it's inactive, because it's marked it as inactive, it's now subject to being vacuumed, and that's the problem. So, a lot of steps to get there, but we can see now that this is a pretty disastrous bug. Yes, so it's a good question. So what kind of automated tests could you do to catch this? Now, in this case, this test is really about our policies around storage of files and the nature of what it means to be inactive or active. And so, yes, I would say in this case, you could do unit testing, and maybe I'll even take a stab at writing a unit test. In fact, we may already have a unit test because in reality, what happened here was we had two security policies that actually were not explicitly connected, but interleave with one another in a way that we didn't intend. And so we actually have unit tests for the storage system. And so I believe we have a negative test. So if we have a, let's see, we don't have a negative test, it seems like. But the negative test here would be, under our current policy, if a file is already owned by someone, then you can't actually change its inactive to active state or vice versa. And so that's the policy that is actually wrong. That's the policy that we need to change. And so I'll go ahead and I'll actually write a test for us to see this. So I'm gonna pop a new window here. Move that to the side. And so let's do the test. So if I run mix test, let's see. Let's just see if this works. Make this a little bit bigger. So that's running. I'm going to go ahead and just go through the unit tests we already have for our source system. So the first is a simple test that checks the file and that you can get it out of the source system. The second is that if you type a file that doesn't test, it actually returns an error. The third is this idea, which is the operation. Now, the thing I didn't cover is like, what does that look like? So it's very straightforward. So first, we create an account, and that's just our account that you would get if you I guess my speech is very good. Just check my levels. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure that folders. Okay, let's keep going. So it creates an account, and this is the same. This is the account that you have associated with your email address, and then a file. In this case, the file record, and then it just verifies that it was actually promoted successfully, and that works. So now we have this idea of motion tokens, which are used to basically promote files securely. So when you get back a file, you actually have to provide motion to that. Let's see. Okay, does that fix it? Yeah, that looks like the levels are better. It looks like my RTX noise canceller was breaking for some reason, so you may hear some background noise as I type now, unfortunately. Maybe I can, on the fly, throw a noise canceller on this. Just give me 1 second. Gain, noise suppression, done. Okay, let's see if that actually helps or not. Okay, so you may or may not hear my keyboard now. Let's find out. So basically, this is another test that just checks that the promotion tokens work, which is a way to promote a file using a secure token, and then it checks that we can re-promote the file, and so on. So now the test we're going to add is that if you promote a file and you're not the account holder, that it will fail. And that actually is not what we want, but just for the sake of showing you, I'm going to go ahead and implement this test. So we should, now in this case, we're going to create 2 accounts. Okay, we only need 1 temp file in this case. And now let's promote the file. Oh, this is the multi-fetch promotion thing. So I'm going to just go ahead and do this one here. So this is going to promote it with that first account. And this is going to just make sure that the fetch worked, the promotion works. And now the next check is if we try to promote it with our other account, it will fail. And so let me just verify that that is the expected behavior. So if I go to promote, let's see, inactive. Oh, let's see, inactive. Right, so that demotes inactive. This is the routine that demotes the files if they're inactive. This is the kind of the other piece of the vacuumer. Let's see. In fact, this code may not actually live in the storage layer. It may be actually in the controller. So this is the controller that is used to handle file uploads. And so that's actually this is the one that handles file reads. So let me just think for a second here. The actual place where we do the promotion is in hub channel. And so hub channel, yeah, I don't know if my keys are coming through or not. So the hub channel is where all the real-time networking happens when you're communicating with Reticulum. So this is the center kind of code path for all the messages that get sent. And so this is the actual key routine where we handle an incoming file pin, or an object pin. And so we check your permission, we perform the pin, which writes that database record to the room objects table, and then we promote the file, which I believe will just silently fail, actually, if you're not the, if it is already promoted and you're not the owner. And then we set the file to be active if it's not already active, right? And so if I go to this own file module, let's take a look at set active. Okay, so what we do is in this this own file module is it's kind of like the active record class if you're familiar with Rails. It's the module that contains all the functions that have to do with this own files table. And so the root of this problem actually stems, now I remember, from this chain of calls. And so set active will call this get by UUID an account, and this will look up the own file by both the own file UUID and the account. And the theory here is that if the account specified is not the account that is associated with this own file, it ends up returning nil, and this will just fall through. Let's see. Oh, could there be a race condition there if the vacuum had started? Yes, certainly if the vacuum is coming along. Well, let me just think. So the only real place where there's contention on the underlying file system is when there are when an ownership is introduced, which moves the file from the expiring to the owned folder. And then if somebody that comes along then and starts walking those folders, they may see an out of date view of the directory structure. And so certainly it could be the case that it might try removing a file that no longer exists. Now that race condition, I'm not sure if it is either going to be gracefully handled, if the remove will just silently fail, or if we need to add a handler, or we need to add a lock. I would suspect we probably don't need a lock because there's probably some kind of consistency guarantees with NFS, which is what we use in production, or X4 or whatever. But I'd have to investigate that. So that's a very good point, though, that if by some strange coincidence somebody pinned a file as that vacuumer was running and walking the directory folder, it may see files in the expiring folder that are no longer there when the promotion occurs. The other part, though, the inactive promotion stuff does run serially, and it will be a serialized thing. So the two parts of the vacuumer are serialized, if I recall. So we set the state to active only if the account matches. And this is basically the crux of the problem. So when we come in here, this set active is a little bit misleading. It really should be, oh, no problem. No problem for the questions. I'm happy to answer them. And so the crux of the problem is that this function should really be named set active if account matches, or something like that. So it kind of silently doesn't do anything if the account is not the same account. And so now the question is this actually what we want? So this changes basically our policy around ownership. So let me go back and just write my test if I can. Now, this is still compiling. So I may not have time to write the actual code. Hopefully this is helpful to just go through it. I don't want to go past the end of time because I know people are probably busy. But the crux of the problem is that this is effectively only doing the operation if the account is the account that owns the file. And so if you try to pin a file, as I did in my test case, that you don't own, it will pin the object because it will get far enough to actually run this perform pin. But then the bit that actually sets the object to active, which is what you usually want if you were the one to upload it, will fail silently. And so the object will remain inactive and eventually get swept up. So the real head scratcher here is this actually what we want? And so the answer, I think, is no. I think we actually want to change this policy. I think we actually want to make it so that even if you're not the owner, if you have the permission to pin objects in a room, you do de facto have the permission to change the durability of the object, but not the ownership. Because basically when you're pinning an object, if you have the rights to pin it, you certainly have the rights to decide the durability of the object. It can't be the case that you only have one but not the other. So we would have to either decide, A, do we just want to prevent people from ever pinning objects they don't own? Or do we want to allow pinning of objects they don't own and therefore grant them the ability to decide if those objects remain durable, despite the fact that they don't own them? And I think that's actually what we want. Now, the reason we want that is because we have a lot of user interface elements and a lot of use cases that assume that other people can actually unpin objects and repin objects even if they don't own them. So a really classic example of this is if I just have my smiley face here and I'm my other user, you know, it's pinned, right? And this person happened to upload it, but really from both people's point of view, it's not really obvious that something was uploaded here. It's really just kind of incidental because they used the text message to create this thing, but they don't really care that it's uploaded, and they probably don't even care that they own it because it's just a piece of text that they typed into the chat box. But it'd be quite strange if you use the chat to upload something like this and you couldn't unpin it. Or particularly the UX that's really interesting is when you have your spacebar held as another person that doesn't own the file, you can actually move it around. It's kind of a convenience, like you can hit space and move around a pinned object and let go, and it will repin it. And so that would basically mean that you wouldn't be able to do that, because to do that, you actually have to have the ability to repin the object and unpin the object and then repin the object. So basically that, I think, decides that we should change this policy. Now, I apologize for not being able to dive into the actual implementation. Maybe I'll carry that through to the next stream, or maybe we'll talk about something else. But basically, this is the bug, and we would need to change the policy here so that ultimately people that don't own a file can still have the rights to override the durability of them when they are pinned or unpinned. And so the actual fix will boil down to writing a test to capture the problem, as mentioned in the chat. You'd want to write a test because obviously this is a very bad bug, and you really want to make sure that if it were to get reintroduced, it would be caught by the test suite. And then certainly you would write a test for that, and then you would change this implementation to simply ignore the account. You would simply ignore the account here, and basically you might refactor it a bit because you'd only want to use this routine in this context where it ignores the account. So I would need to check all the call sites. But ultimately, the goal here is that these set active and set inactive flags should not care who's calling it. It should basically just be whoever is allowed to call it. Now, these are not public APIs, so it's certainly safe to make these ignore the account because the only call sites that are calling them are ones that we control. And so in our hubs channel, we'll basically just verify that this is the only call site doing this and that it's safe for us to ignore the account down that code path. Yes, so cloning objects actually, I believe, is very, very straightforward in the sense that it just creates a copy of the room object with the same URL, and all the other semantics around who owns the object remain the same. But if it is associated with a file, it may carry through these semantics. I have to check to be sure. So anyway, this is my first attempt at streaming. I hope it was informative. Hopefully it wasn't too long-winded. I was expecting to kind of go through more code. I spent a lot more time talking about how things work, and so I'll work on doing a better job of kind of getting right to the point. But overall, this was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate everybody watching, and I'm hoping to continue to do this. So I'll come back hopefully on Thursday is the plan, same time, same place, to talk more about hacking on hubs. And so thanks everybody for joining, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.